What attracted you? You're clearly passionate about the story. Why?
Well, it initially started as accidentally out of some family research I was doing, in which one of my great-great-grandfathers was a long-serving policeman, had mentioned that he'd crossed paths with Martin Cash, the bushranger. Had time on my hands, didn't know much about Martin Cash, thought I'll read a bit about him. Martin Cash then relayed a story that he was in the condemned cell in Hobart waiting to be hanged, and had a conversation with the man who asked how he was. And he said, "I'm in very good health, thank you." The conversation was with the hangman. And I thought, what a bizarre conversation this was between a man about to be hanged and his own executioner. Now, Cash ultimately got commuted, but the curiosity about the hangman, as you know, I came up in Tasmania. History lessons taught me nothing about all this exciting stuff about hangmen and pirates and cannibals and bushrangers and everything else that I discovered.
Not to mention homosexuality.
And not to mention homosexuality.
Which is a huge part of this
story. It is. And so curiosity, time on my hands, and the power of Google, and this is the result.
Okay, what is the story? Basically, the story of Solomon Blay.
He was born in Oxford, 1816, big family of 12. This is the time of the Industrial Revolution, which was throwing a lot of people out of work and rising population. So the family couldn't really feed itself. So as a teenager, like many others, he was forced into petty crime to survive. Stole some onions, 4 months jail. Stole some potatoes, 12 months jail. And then decided there must be a better way to make some money. I should make some. So he went into counterfeiting, which was a huge crime in those days. And for those troubles, he got 14 years transportation to Van Diemen's Land. So he arrived in the early 1830s. By the age of 21, 22, when he arrived, he'd separated from his family for the rest of his life. He'd been in a prison hulk, a dangerous sea voyage. Many of those ships never even made it. He'd been whipped. He'd suffered syphilis. He was quickly into a chain gang down in Tasmania, and bread and water sentences. And then, in his infinite wisdom, decided that maybe his best future for income and security lay in applying to become the hangman. So he did, and at the age of 25, he became Queen Victoria's youngest hangman in the whole empire, and was to do that for near on the next 50 years of his life.
And he's probably the most prolific hangman in the world, was he?
Probably on a per capita basis he was. In Queen Victoria's reign of 64 years, England hanged 1,100 people. Australia in the same period, with much smaller population, hanged 1,500, and of those 1,500, Van Diemen's Land did 500. So the noose swung more lustily, and the whip was flayed more diligently in Van Diemen's Land than anywhere else. So probably on a per capita basis, he probably was the number one.
The lack of concern for human life comes through in the book, and not just because of execution, but they're leading very basic existence and a violent and predatory existence. But you seem to make the point that Solomon Blay suffered by what he did. If there was such a disrespect for human life, why did he care about making a living killing people?
Well, I think it was his choice. I think the book tries to tell the story that it was his choice as a young man that was his best future. I don't think he could have been aware at that stage what it meant. A, to kill people for a living, and B, the amount of demonisation and ostracisation that would go on in his life. People would refuse to sit with him, eat with him, sit on the coach, drink, had stones thrown at him, all sorts of things. And he was in fear of his own life because there was lots of revenge attacks from other convicts or families. And I think he steeled himself with, firstly, liquor and later on with sedatives to actually do the job. And eventually he said, once you get used to it, it's not so bad. And things like there's no harm in swinging a man if he's guilty. And I think he just literally had to steel himself to it. So he would drink. They would put him in a cell before the hanging to make sure he didn't run away and didn't get drunk before the job. As soon as the job was over, he would resort to liquor to calm himself down.
One of the things that came through, and again, I mentioned it in passing a moment ago, I had no understanding of the degree of homosexuality that existed, and people were being executed for it as well, so-called unnatural acts. But that was obviously, and this was a key part of our beginning.
Well, it was, and there were official reports back to London saying that Van Diemen's Land was probably the most homosexual society in the world as they knew it. Homosexuality was the sort of the big evil for the establishment in London, and a lot of cases of mutiny within the Navy were code for homosexuality on ships, and captains and others were hung even if the offences occurred on their watch. And within the prisons, be it in the female factories or where the men were held, there was a lot of same-sex relationships, some out of genuine love, and some was really just, people were saying, well, I will do what I can to survive and get my satisfaction, whatever it takes and whatever the cost.